Okay, so calling these 5 plugins underrated maybe isn't exactly accurate. This is more 5 of my favorite Logic plugins, or even just 5 Logic plugins I think are really useful. But 5 underrated Logic plugins just sounded like a more click-worthy title, so I'm doing the social media thing, you know? Hi guys, it's Emma, welcome back to my channel, and if you're new here, then welcome to the chaos. I do all things music related on here, from audio engineering style content, to production and songwriting challenges, to just talking about music and musician life. Today's video is audio engineering style content. We're going to talk about some plugins. There are lots of great plugins out there, both paid for and free plugins that you can get to work on any DAW, but obviously each individual DAW comes with its own selection of great plugins. Well, I don't know, some of them aren't so great. Some of them aren't so great. I'm pretty sure that every single DAW has like the basic stock kind of plugins that you need to be able to do a project. Like, you don't really need anything other than what is in your DAW already to make a song. They have EQs, they have compressors, they probably have some sort of basic synth, they have a variety of reverbs. The question is, are they any good? If you use Logic, well then the stock plugins are a big part of why a lot of people like Logic and why people recommend Logic. Like, when you look at people debating the different DAWs, or like personifying the different DAWs and then making them debate each other, which I've seen as a funny TikTok. One of the things that people point to about Logic and why a lot of people like it is that the stock plugins and like the stock sounds and stuff mean that it is very good for building tracks in. Anyway, so I thought I would challenge myself to pick 5 Logic stock plugins that I would say I use the most, that I like the most, and that I still think are perfectly suitable for the job, even now that I've started like buying fancy plugins. Ooh. So here are 5 Logic plugins that I think are a little bit underrated. They're probably not really underrated, but I don't know. I haven't heard anyone sing their praises loud enough, so I'm going to sing them. Number 1! Actually, I have heard quite a few people sing the praises of this particular one. The Logic stock compressor. I still tend to go for this compressor, even though I have a couple of ones that I've gotten for free. I mean, technically the LA2A one that I got from Universal Audio is not a free plugin, but at the time I got it in the time when they were giving it away for free. A lot of the ones that people like will talk about and tell you that are really good for certain jobs, it's based around the fact they are modeled on old analog gear, that when you use that analog gear it would give a particular tone, and obviously because they have modeled this digital version, this plug-in version on that piece of gear, it gives you that same sort of tone. Something I need to do more learning about in terms of audio engineering in general is learning about old analog pieces of gear that these things are often modeled on. Most of the learning I've done about compression so far, I have focused on like the application of how to use compressors and training my ears to be able to hear compression better, which is probably one of the main reasons why I still, when I'm just looking to throw a compressor on, I quite often just pull up the Logic stock compressor still. And quite often I will just go for the regular digital one that comes up first. They're all designed to, again, be like a particular type of compressor based off of actual analog gear again. But I like them because they have all of the controls in here. So I can sit and actually do compression as I have learnt it, and I can make really conscious decisions about the compression more easily because I have all of the controls. So when you pull up something like, where is it? Like the one that's based on the 2A, you can see you've not got threshold, you've not got ratio, you've not got attack, you've just got peak reduction and then gain. So I'm not saying this makes this a bad compressor or anything. It's got its purpose. But for me, as a more inexperienced engineer, and if I am looking for something, like if I had one compressor in my arsenal, I would not pick this one, obviously. I would pick the Logic stock one. You know, there are a couple of them you have a few more controls than others, but they all have threshold and ratio. And if you're just throwing something on where you don't really have these two to be able to set, you're not really going to learn how to compress well. But also, like, if I want a versatile compressor that I can put on anything, this is the one for it, because again, I've got all of the settings. So if I want a fast attack, I can set a really fast attack. If I want a slow attack, I can set a really slow attack. But yeah, that's the main reason I like this, is just that it is what you want from a stock compressor plugin. It is versatile. I value versatile plugins over everything else. Which leads me on to my second plugin, which again, the main reason I like this is its versatility. So we've got some acoustic guitar here to demonstrate Space Designer. Space Designer is still one of my favorite reverbs. it is a nice basic reverb. It's nothing big, it's nothing fancy. It can do big and fancy. There are some, you can set the settings so that you can have some really big, spacey reverbs with lots of feedback on them. And because of that, again, it's very versatile. I love how many controls I have. I've got my pre-delay control. I've got my overall length of my reverb. I've got the size of my reverb, so I can make like the size of the space that it's in massive. And then you've also got the output EQ, so you can EQ it a little bit as well. And then you've also got your volume envelope, so this is the level of the reverb over time. But you've also got a filter envelope. Because we can set this filter to like bring the frequencies down as the reverb decays, it creates that really lovely natural room feel to it. Whereas if like... you can hear that difference, how that feels more like an unnatural kind of reverb. Whereas that feels more like a sort of natural room reverb. So it's a really nice feature having that. My third plugin is another time delay effect plugin. There are a few nice delays in here. Tape delay is very nice. Quite often that gets added when if you put a stock Logic sound on. Quite often tape delay is the delay that it will put onto that Logic sound. But I really like the stereo delay. Why do I like the stereo delay? Because it's stereo. It's basically just a really basic delay. Like you could set it, if I set it so that both of these were exactly the same, and then... oh, that's actually not a really nice delay to have on this particular guitar. I'm just gonna... yeah, Quavers sounds nicer, okay. So I can say it's they're both the same like that, so it's just like a regular delay. But what I can also do is I can set the settings differently for the right and the left. So that's basically the right and the left... I've done that the wrong way around, but you know what I meant. The left and the right panning. So what I hear in my left ear will be slightly different from what I hear in my right ear. So I could set it to two different delay values in the delay time value I can set differently. Which is really nice. I love using two different delay times, especially on strummed guitars. I really like how this sounds on strummed guitars. It's a lovely, subtle way just make that guitar that little bit more interesting. I love it. But I can also, change the high and low pass frequencies, or high cut and low cut frequencies even. And I could also change the amount of feedback. So I could have loads of feedback in one. And then you also can set crossover left to right. So it'll cross feed the signals back and forth to each other's delay times, which is different from just like setting them both the same and having them both do the same thing. You can still hear that that's different from before. And I don't generally cross feed them as much because it can get a bit hectic. But if I wanted a really hectic delay. Anywho, on to number 4. And I feel like this one is actually going to be one that when I say this, people are going to be like, really? Really? But I really, really like Logic Amp Designer. Not as, like, an example of really good amp modeling, right? When it comes to amp simulators out there, right, the main thing that people often are looking for is actually that they're a really good model of actual existing amps. Much like people love certain compressors because they are a really good model of the actual analog gear that they can't afford to buy, but they can afford to buy the plugin. Having a really good amp sim means getting access to lots of different amps, real life analog amps, without having to buy all of that gear, which is really expensive. There is an amp modeler plugin out there called Neural Amp Modeler. It is entirely free to use, and there are so many amp models that you can download to use for it that are also free, and it is really good. It is really, 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 really good. That's not why I like the Logic Amp Simulator. I don't think it is a good amp sim. There are some really terrible sounding amps in this. What I think it's really good for is if you don't actually care about making it sound like it's going through a particular amp, like if that's not really what you're going for, you're just using it like you would use any other effect in Logic. Quite often what I'll want to do is just like add a little bit of grit to something. I want some sort of electric guitar tone. I don't have a particular one in mind, and if that's the case, then throwing this on and just having a play with it, like, you can get good electric guitar tones out of this. I think that a lot of the distorted ones are not particularly great. I think I quite like this small British distorted one. Yeah. I quite like the tone that gives. I quite like this one. Ah, here it is. This one can be quite good when I want to just add, like, just really heavily distorted electric guitar doing just basic one strums or chugging or something. I think this one's quite good for that. Like, if I'm not going for a particular tone, I just know I want some distorted guitars just doing something basic in the background. I really quite like this one. I mean, not on this particular guitar, but I've used this quite a few times when I want just like a reverby guitar amp sound. I really like this one. Quite often if I literally just want an amp sounding reverb, I just throw on the amp simulator because, you know, obviously the reverb on this is an amp sounding reverb. Something else I will quite often do though, if I put both of these in now, if I give you guys the acoustic guitar just mic'd as well with this. You can hear that there. If I just mix in that DI'd signal now, really nice and low. It's just adding that extra bit of interest to that acoustic guitar, as if it was an effect on the, you know, mic'd up signals. One I particularly like to use for this is this awesome tweed one. It's a really great way, I find, for if I've got quite a bassy sounding mic'd up guitar sound and I don't want to take out loads of that bass and I don't just want to boost those trebles, but I want to give it a bit more presence in the treble, having that DI'd signal that then I put one of these amp sims on, it's not making it sound like an electric guitar, it's just giving it a little bit more bright to it and a bit of grit with that brightness. I'm kind of using it just like a way to add some saturation, and I love using the amp designer for that. Okay, so before we do number 5, I just want to do a few quick honorable mentions because there are some other great plugins in here. I limited myself to picking 5 and it seems a shame. The pedal board, for the same reason that I like the amp designer, I quite like the pedal board. You know, if I just want to add a little bit of distortion to something, then I might just go in here and pick one of these distortion ones, like this fuzz one maybe. I also really like Chromaverb. Space Designer is my personal favourite, but Chromaverb is also a really great reverb. Again, I like that I've got this dampening EQ. The one reason I would say I picked Space Designer over Chromaverb is that I think Chromaverb is not as versatile as Space Designer, which is why it's not in my top 5. But I also really love Alchemy. Specifically, I think it's got some really great presets in here that then you can just tinker with a little bit, especially if you just want like little sparkly sounds or little pad sounds in there. There's also some nice bass sounds in here as well. Okay, the last plugin that I want to talk about, the sampler. Nice basic plugin, a sampler, isn't it? Every single DAW will have its own sampler. It's just a tool that you need in order to be able to do a lot of music production. You can't really do a lot of music production without some sort of sampler. The reason why I like the Logic stock one is quite simply that, in my opinion, this sampler is perfectly good and adequate enough that I don't really feel the need to go and buy or even look for a different free sampler out there that would be any better in any way. There are only so many things you really want to be able to do with a sampler. Like if I want to add loads of effect to this, I don't necessarily want to do that in an actual sampler plugin. I can do that by adding specific plugins that I know will do specific jobs for me later. There are quite a few settings in this and quite a few ways that this sampler is really useful. So I'm just going to pull up something from Splice. Drag and drop, nice and easy sample use. Zone per file, zone per note. But my absolute favourite thing is that I can could drop 2 samples in here, right? And I assume that you can probably do this with other samples as well. So here's one of those drums. The other one muted. The other one. Both of them playing at once. So if I wanted to like layer up kick sounds or something, I can do it within the sampler. And that's great for when you're doing sound design type stuff, because you can obviously layering 2 different sounds together is a great way to create a new sound that would be exactly what you're looking for or something interesting. I wouldn't necessarily do it with kicks personally myself, because quite often when I'm layering up 2 different kicks, I want to be able to balance them out more easily and like make different EQ settings on each of them. Now, there is a certain amount of like editing that you can do to the individual files in here, but it's just so much easier just to have them on different tracks and be able to just treat them differently. But point being, you can do this with this. And obviously after that, it's just basically all the settings that you expect of a basic sampler, that you can change the length of your sample, you can add fades in, reverse it. You can also tune it differently, so I can change the original tuned pitch of it, which is always a fun way to be able to alter a sound. And I really like that it tells me down here what the original note of the sample that I've picked is, because quite often if I'm playing in a kick like this, I want to make sure that the note that the MIDI is playing is either the original one or something near it. Like quite often I will try and pick a note that is actually in the scale, the key of the song, but I will try and get it closer to it than like, you know, I wouldn't want to play this all the way up here. It also has a basic synth in it. I can't say I've ever used the synth in this. I should actually have a look at the synth aspect of the sampler at some point. It is a perfectly good sampler. I don't really feel the need to get anything else. It's got all the settings I want on it. I will sometimes find when I'm loading stuff in, like, I find it really easy to get, like, all mixed up trying to organize my sounds and stuff if I'm using more than one sound. Anywho, those are just basically 5 Logic plugins that I really like, that I still use loads, even though I've started buying all sorts of fancy plugins now. I would love to hear other people's favorite plugins from Logic in the comments below, or, like, if you use a different DAW, what are some great stock plugins that are in your DAW. But mainly this video is just to sing the praises of some stock plugins, because really you can create a perfectly good track with nothing but stock plugins. Figuring out which plugins like you actually need to buy and upgrade on, like which ones, like personally I did not like the stock Logic de-esser. But there are certain plugins where you're never going to need anything more than the stock Logic ones. Anywho, I hope that you enjoyed this video, and if you did, then you might enjoy my content on the channel in general, in which case you might want to hit that subscribe button. But I know that that is a big decision to make, so do feel free to check out some other videos before you do so. There will be something recommended on the end screen. If you want to follow me on all of my socials, they are linked in the description below. There is also a link down there to my Buy Me a Coffee account, where if you join my membership, you get access to special content, mainly outtakes videos from these videos. Or you can just send me a one-off donation if you just wanted to go, nice video, mate. Okay, that's all for today's video, guys. I shall see you next time with another fun music-related video of some sort.